Hey everyone, on the next episode of Noon, allow me to introduce you to Gaby, a dedicated nurse with a passion that extends beyond the traditional realms of healthcare. Gaby's fervor lies in the realm of adverse childhood experiences, a topic not widely known but immensely significant. Their commitment to understanding and addressing ACEs adds a unique layer to their role as a healthcare professional. Gaby is also a fervent advocate for mental health, particularly among healthcare providers. Join us for a compelling conversation as Gaby delves into the intricacies of ACEs, shares their experiences, and discusses the vital need for prioritizing mental health in the healthcare community. This episode promises to be an eye-opening exploration of less explored facets of healthcare. Let's get started. All right, Gaby, thank you so much for joining us today on the 911 Nonsense podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
And it's great to see you, friend. Thank you for having me.
We've known each other for a pretty long time, but you disappeared for a few years, and then you came back and you just popped back up into the field, and it's so good to see you back in your old playhouse.
I know, I sure did. I was trying to think about when the last time I saw you. So the last time I was at the department that you and I met was probably 2015, maybe. And then, I was out of the department for a little bit, and then I am back. So just as I first met you, I re-encountered you again. It was great. No time ever passed, it felt like.
Yeah, I know it. And you look great. I mean, you don't look any different than you did back then. So it's pretty cool that we were able to.
You certainly do look the same, huh?
Yes, exactly. You can't even believe that it's been an 8-year difference. So can I go ahead and get an introduction of you really quick, and then we'll start moving on?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Gaby. I have been in the healthcare world since sometime around maybe 2008 or so. So my first dive into healthcare actually started at the Agora Crisis Center. And I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they are the oldest student-run crisis center in the country. Super cool. And this is at UNM. So that was my first delve in healthcare, was actually in the mental health world of it. And I spent 7 years there at Agora as a volunteer. I was part of their board of directors for about 5 of those years or so. And then I started working at a hospital back in 2008 or so. I actually started out in the kitchens way back when, and moved up to working at an emergency department where I spent 5 years while I was going to nursing school. And I've been a nurse for the past 8 years. So that's probably part of the reason why we haven't ran into each other, is because I hadn't been back as a nurse in my department until I saw you just a couple of weeks ago. But so I have a background in step down. I was a PCU nurse for just over 3 years, spent 5 years in an ICU, and I am back home, my original place. So
yeah, well, welcome back. It's good to see you. So were you working as a tech previously, in the mental health facility that you were in, or what kind of role did you play while you were there?
So the Agora Crisis Center is an entity, a student-run entity, just like a department, basically, kind of like you have the Women's Resource Center or the Student Health Center or whatever. So I was a volunteer there. We went through a training of 4 weekends worth, 4 single-day weekends worth of training. So we're trained paraprofessionals, basically, and you're trained on anything from, validation of feelings of people, what does active listening look like, all the way to how do you de-escalate somebody who is actively suicidal, has a gun to their head, and you cannot find where they are. They don't know where they are. So this is a volunteer-based, technically not a counselor, but something similar to, because of course counselors and social workers go through many, many, many hours of training. But this was like I said, a trained paraprofessional was when I first started. And then when I moved into the hospital, my first delve in actual more interaction with patients was as a clerk.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure for a volunteer, but it almost sounds like you're kind of a peer-to-peer position.
Exactly. And I felt super well supported when it comes to my training. I truthfully say, I think having gone to the Agora Crisis Center and volunteered there and worked there for many years was probably one of the best decisions that I have ever made for myself in my life. Like it completely changed the course of my life. And it wasn't just, like the opportunities that it provided me or the fact that like I met my wife there like 12 years ago or something like that. It was, you know, it's opportunities like I that was when I first learned that like your average American only gets about 15 minutes active listening time. Like, it's things that like it teaches you how to talk to people, how to handle conflict, that kind of stuff. It was incredible. So that was my first delve in mental health, really.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And it sounds like it gave you a lot of really good opportunity to learn better communication skills. Is that kind of where your passion is and where maybe you see yourself progressing in the future?
I have considered like what would my role be in the mental health community? And it's interesting because I don't know if I'd ever work like hands on in the mental health world other than what I've done or what I do so far. But I've had some really incredible opportunities. Like when we were at the Agora Crisis Center, we got the opportunity to train the FBI on like how to
Oh,
de-escalate somebody who's actively suicidal. Yeah, it was super cool.
that
Like
is super
we had
cool.
scenarios for them. Like we grilled them and we grilled them hard. Like it was merciless. And like if somebody made a mistake, we give them feedback. But like, it was super cool for like, I was in my young 20s, like when I got this opportunity. So it was super interesting. I got the opportunity to like speak to the Board of Regents on behalf of Agora because there was a time where like our budget was being threatened and like I got to present like why is it important for our community to have the Agora Crisis Center, and my latest delve in the mental health world lately has been I've been on what I call the Tour de ACE course. So I don't know if you've heard about ACE course, but
No.
uh, adverse childhood experiences. It's the Tour de ACE.
Okay.
but so adverse childhood experiences are something that I learned about like I don't know, 5-ish years ago or something like that. And it just like completely turned my world upside down when I learned about this. And I was like, how have I been a critical care nurse for like years already and never heard about this? And so that's been my latest delve in the mental health world has been presenting. I've presented at several conferences, anywhere from presenting to my chaplain friends and my residents all the way to like I was able to present it back in March at the Critical Care Symposium, the Albuquerque Association of Critical Care Nurses symposium that we had. There was probably a couple hundred people there. And, you know, uh, when I learned what adverse childhood experiences were, I started asking people, I was like, had you heard about this? Like, this is like, how do I not know that there's a correlation between childhood trauma and the severity of somebody's chronic illness and the fact that somebody can die even 20 years younger because of the severity of their childhood trauma that they had? And I was very surprised to hear that, like, my medical directors hadn't heard about them. Like, my NPs in the ICU that I work with are absolute badasses. Nobody had heard about them. A couple of my peers had, but that was it. And so basically, what happens with average childhood experiences is it's a survey basically of different forms of trauma that a child can go through. And it's divided into three categories: it's abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. So any time that somebody answers yes to any of these 10 plus questions, because some entities use 13, 14 questions, it's a point, let's put it that way. And it can be questions such as, are your parents divorced? Or were you ever subjected to neglect in the household? Was either your parents or a guardian who was in the throes of substance misuse? Or, were any of your guardians or parents incarcerated? Things like that. And when somebody goes up to four or more adverse childhood experiences, their chances of ending up with a chronic illness can eat twofold. So, for example, somebody is 2.1 times more likely to end up with kidney disease. Somebody is four times more likely to end up with COPD, um, whatever many times more likely to end up with cardiovascular disease. And if you've had four or more adverse childhood experiences, people are 37.5 times more likely to attempt suicide. So it is some major, major health changes when, you know, there's all these like traumatic childhood experiences and your well-being and your wellness as an adult. And people hadn't heard about it. And I was like, how this isn't okay. Like we have to change it. So hence my tour de ace.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, when you think about it, right, we always kind of joke about our childhood trauma, but then actually getting to see the correlation in numbers is really fantastic. I'm curious as to how they correlate the numbers, like you were saying. There's just as an example, I don't know the actual numbers, but when you're saying they correlate to having a higher risk for renal problems or COPD, is that correlated because people are less likely to take care of themselves or they're more likely to eat? So like I'm guessing there's also a correlation in obesity. So is it because they're more likely to eat fast food, or how does that correlate?
Very good question. So interestingly enough, a lot of this is neuropathophysiology. So the way that I like to explain it to people is when you're subjected to trauma, trauma is eventually expected to subside, right? Whether it is from the event has come and gone, or if you're a child, your parent or your guardian ideally should come reassure you or whatever. So having gone through those traumatic experiences means that you go into fight or flight and your body doesn't understand a difference between like, hey, I'm a little nervous, I'm doing a podcast with my friend I haven't seen in a little bit, or like I am actively being chased by somebody who's like stalking me or whatever. Your body doesn't really differentiate that fight or flight. And when you're in a perpetual fight or flight mode, that creates changes in the body, right? So in a child, for example, this means that they're dysregulated constantly. And as their brain is developing, the brain is very much like a topiary when somebody's growing up. And that means that the parts that you're most regularly using are strengthened. Is what your brain focuses on, resources and whatever. And the parts that you don't use, you almost like prune them away. So it's like a topiary. So when a bush grows, it doesn't grow into the shape of Mickey Mouse. It grows into whatever shape you give it form in. So it's very similar with childhood brains. And this means that when you're in that constant fight or flight, your body has to protect you from going into like there's a bear over there. So that means that if I do the cosine of the tangent of the square root of no, if you start thinking about if you can run away from it and how you can run, no, your brain shuts that down. So your frontal lobe gets shut down when you're in fight or flight because your body just needs to react. It needs to keep you safe. So when children are constantly under that fight or flight mode, it shuts down that frontal lobe. Your body takes input from bottom up and inside out is the same way that it develops. Like your brain stem is your first part of your brain that takes that input. And if you're regulated and comfortable, this input moves all the way up to your prefrontal cortex, which is your critical thinking, it's your inhibition, it's your personality, it's what makes you you as a human being. Whereas if you're functioning in that brainstem, that like deep reptilian brain regulatory functions, it is survival mode. That is all. So what happens when somebody is in constant survival mode is you have these like neurological pathophysiological changes in order to support that topiary. So when somebody is constantly dysregulated, that frontal lobe is constantly shut down, catecholamines surging through their body constantly, like they have to soothe somehow. And you cope with whatever way you can. And if that frontal lobe is shut down, that means that you probably aren't thinking critically about like, is this bottle of wine going to solve my problems? You're simply trying to cope. And that constant dysregulation means that there's a constant trigger of your cardiovascular system, your immune system, like everything goes haywire because of trauma.
What an amazing explanation. Thank you for that. That was awesome, dude.
Thank you. Can you tell I've been touring a little bit?
Not at all. So now how do you correlate that? Okay, so now that you've explained that, how do you correlate that into an adult, right? And I'm not talking about patients specifically. I want to talk about healthcare workers.
Bingo. Absolutely. And that's again, we talked about coping, right? Is that we cope whatever we can. And one of the things that healthcare brings us is that camaraderie. And I think, especially in the EMS world, there is nobody out there like that kind of trauma bonding that you form with your EMS peers. And I've been in the healthcare world for 15 years, and I have never seen anybody take care of one another like the ED staff and the EMS staff do. So that social factor is immensely protective for us. In fact, that relational poverty is a huge exacerbation factor for trauma in anybody, really. I don't know if you've ever heard about the study, the Rat Park study, where and this is like works really well for those of us in EMS, where like I'm sure you've seen folks who are like really isolated and don't really reach out compared to the folks that are maybe more social or reach out a little more. So in this study, what was done is rats were separated into two different cages. There was a cage where there was rats in a group doing rat fun stuff, whatever it is that rats do for fun. I don't know, but fun rat stuff there. And these rats had access to two types of bottles. One of them was plain water. The other one was morphine laced water. In the other cage, you had a rat that was simply by themselves. This rat did not have any form of rat fun. They were completely isolated from any other contact from any contact with any other rat, and they also had access to the same two types of water bottles. So what the study found was that rats that were in the rat park were less likely to consume from the morphine laced water. They almost did it recreationally, kind of like human beings do, really. Compared to the rats that were isolated, not only were they more frequently imbibing, they were actually overdosing and dying compared to the rat park cage where no rats died or overdosed. So that social factor of EMS is a huge protective factor, but that also means that we're constantly fight or flight mode. We have to find a way to regulate themselves, which is again when we resort to substances, right? Like, I know he's kind of a controversial figure right now, but Russell Brand said, drugs and alcohol aren't my problem; they are my solution to the problem. And that's when those of us that are in healthcare are trying to cope is whatever way you can, right? Um, but in the end, it takes a toll on you. It is, again, that constant, like what happens to your body when you have huge amounts of norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine running through your body? Like that can't be good long term, which is a lot of what can happen to us if we're like those of us that are adrenaline junkies, like it can be deleterious.
Yeah, that's sad what we're seeing in the healthcare right now. And that is those poor rats, first of all.
Oh no, I know.
I'm
I
just
know.
kidding. I'm just kidding. You know what? They don't even need rats. They can do studies on people in the ER. Like,
I know.
I
I know. I
know.
mean, it's true though. Like relational poverty is huge. And you can tell when somebody's like lonely and they've like when simple things like eye contact, a touch on the shoulder, reassurance is like they're hungry for it, right? It's
Yeah,
heartbreaking.
it is heartbreaking. And it's so hard too because there's so many different kinds of personalities. Like, me personally, I don't hang out with anybody that I work with. Not very often, anyways, outside of work. Like, I have my family group and they have nothing to do with medicine, which I love because I can completely separate from that. But then you have people who like, and we have large groups of people that do this where they get off of work and they all go and drink together, and there's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing
No.
wrong with that as long as it's controlled and you feel like you're taking care of yourself in a controlled manner, right? So that's I wonder if they would have had a different result with mushrooms instead of morphine.
These poor mice tripping balls.
Yeah. Or ketamine,
Oh
right?
God. Oh no. It's like, how do you do guided imagery for a rat? Like, go to your
Yes.
happy rat place. It's like, oh God.
Oh, that's so
But
fantastic.
yeah, it's interesting when you like go hang out with like peers, like more often than not, all we talk about is work.
Yes.
And I'm like, can we just talk about something other than not work? But like 9 times out of 10, 90% of the conversation is work stuff. So,
Right.
I mean, what does that tell you? Like, are we needing to process stuff? Are we like just so dedicated to our field? Like, it's a interesting question to ask ourselves. Like, why are we constantly talking about work
Yes.
when we're not at work?
In my family, we talk a lot about poop. There's a lot of poop stories that go around.
That's funny. That's great. It's like,
You
oh my
see, you
God.
can't
And
get
none of
rid of
your
it.
family is in healthcare?
They are not. They are not.
That's funny. I feel like that's all nurses talk about is poop. So I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure Sam said that their family is not in healthcare.
Yeah, no, we're not.
That's hilarious.
Nurses, EMTs, paramedics, that literally is all we talk about poop. Like in one of the
Oh, that's
last,
funny. I love it that we're not the only ones.
I know, like in one of the last episodes that just came out, we were talking about butt stuff, and it's true. It is all we talk about.
What does that say about you guys, Sam? Just the same way that we're like psychoanalyzing healthcare workers talking about work stuff. What does that say about you and
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah.
family?
Don't psychoanalyze me right now. You don't want to know that side.
Oh, note taken.
No, that's really cool though. Like what how did you find out about that? Was that something that you learned about and you decided to like cuz I can tell you're very passionate about it. You're very passionate about it and the way that you talk about it like shows that you know and you have a really high knowledge base for that. So what prompted that?
I'm trying I wish I could remember the first time that I heard about ACE scores. But I know it came from my wife. And I think she just brought up a paper and was like, because she's a social worker by trade. And she was like, oh, yeah, I just learned about this. And she was telling me about it. And I was like, that math lady meme of like all the calculations are in the background. That was me. And I was like, how have I not heard about this? How does this happen? This doesn't make sense. How can we make it like what? Like the title of my presentation is called The Greatest Unaddressed Public Health Threat That Most Healthcare Workers Don't Know About, which has been my experience every time, has been um, the only group of people that I've had more than 10% of people in the room know was my residents for my department. And everybody else, like even in a room full of critical care nurses where there was a couple of hundred of us, only 10% of them knew. So I was like, how do we not know about this? And so that was my first exposure into it. And I just went down the wormhole. Um, California's first Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, did a great TED talk on it. It's like 15 minutes. Like, if anybody's interested in listening to it, she's brilliant. She's like, I want to be like her. Like I want to present at a like national TED talk level, but she has a great TED talk about it. And I was like, I want to do the same. Like, I want to be the person that brings awareness about the correlation between childhood trauma and unwellness and poor conditions of living, and even your life being truncated like 20 plus years. Like, I want to be that person because nobody's heard about it. And like, how can I be in the healthcare world and the critical care world and not have people know about it? How can you address a problem if you've never heard about it? So, it's unfortunately New Mexico is the state with some of the worst ACE scores in the entire country. And this is largely because of poverty. So I don't know if have you ever worked outside of the state with like patient population outside of the state?
No.
So it's interesting when I was orienting travelers, there was times where I would see them like they're way in over their heads. The patient is really sick. They're not comfortable with it. They're like struggling to like figure out how to manage this patient. And that was my first introduction as to like, oh, our patient population in New Mexico is immensely sick. And this is largely because of our poverty. Our poverty means that we don't have the education, we don't have the nutrition, we don't have the resources to, whether it is, take care of yourself in like disposable income ways. It's just poverty is your most pivotal social determinant of health. So with that being said, our patient population is extremely sick here in New Mexico, and I was like, we can't, we can't let this happen. Like if we're gonna turn things around, we have to start by bringing awareness, and we have to start incorporating more trauma informed care into our world.
So I can tell that your biggest thing is exposure. You want a lot of exposure for your topic. Are you trying to expose the patient population, or are you trying to expose your medical healthcare providers?
At this time, my resources and my attention has gone to healthcare workers because I have the access to, this is a very easy venue for me to reach out to anybody at any of our three largest hospitals. I know somebody somewhere that would be interested in taking me in. I am hoping to go take my presentation nationally next year. But my passion is to teach in to our healthcare workers. I like to have that dialogue of like the questions that you're throwing at me. Like I like to have that. And then maybe someday when I have a bit more help from my peers, start incorporating that more into our patient population.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I How do you overcome those hurdles? For a patient population, how are you able to overcome the hurdles that we have with, because we do have a huge poverty issue. How do you overcome that?
Right. So I think that's also part of the reason why it has felt a little bit more attainable for me to start with healthcare workers because we have the background knowledge, the health literacy, we have the resources, the interest. Um, and it's a dense subject. I mean, it can go into like very deep parts of your brain, like your locus coeruleus and your amygdala, and like how like your trauma pathways are reconfigured with trauma. But having to digest that for healthcare workers is a lot more attainable for me. And I feel like incorporating that public health aspect is another layer of difficulty. Like it's different to try to explain sepsis to your baby medic that you're training compared to your patients. That's when you truly know you've completely understood the subject matter. If you can explain it to a lay person and they're like, oh, that makes sense. Bingo. So that's more advanced level.
No, that's great. That's a great explanation. So, do you think that there is, and I'm going to go a little deep and personal. If you don't want to answer any of these questions, that's perfectly fine. But do you feel that you are very attracted to this specific subject because you may have scored high on this test yourself?
Interesting question. My ACE score is actually a 1. So
Oh,
I am extremely fortunate to have not endured this much trauma now. Um, the thing about our current formats of testing for ACE scores is that they're not all encompassing. So if you expanded upon these questions, this would be different because the questionnaire that most entities throughout the country use, at least is to my knowledge, is 10 questions. It doesn't include anything about racism. It doesn't include anything about your, like, it does actually, some of them include bullying. The 10 questions that I use for when I present does not include anything about bullying. Um, and there the 10 questions that I use also don't include anything when it comes to like if you're part of the LGBTQ community, for example, and like having come out of the closet. So if you expand it on some events that are actually trauma with a big T, because like I know for myself, my coming out of the closet was really pivotal and like traumatic. Like I will carry a lot of that pain with me forever. Bullying was pivotal for me in my life. I think that is probably one of my most like defining moments of my childhood was the amount of bullying that I was subjected to. So if you expand it on the actual 10 questions, I do fit the format of 4 plus. With the current A scores that I utilize for my presentations is just a 1. But I mean, a 4, it puts me at a risk of the numbers that I shared, you know?
Sure. No, that's an interesting perspective. So is it for whoever's teaching it, they get to choose the questions that they utilize on the test, or is it a fairly set standard questionnaire?
The standard is 10, and each entity may expand on them a little bit more. So, just like every hospital has different protocols, for example, it's kind of the same way for A scores. But like I said, my wife's entity uses 14 questions in their questionnaire. Um, so, is it all encompassing? No, it certainly isn't. There's still quite a long ways for us to go into like what is encompassing enough for this, you know?
Right.
So we, I know when I was going through the test myself, I was like, oh, there's a bunch of things missing in here that are like trauma with a big T, like scar you for life, change you forever kind of thing that we're missing.
So what is the definition or what is your definition for childhood? What is the age cap for that?
It's 0 to 8. I'm sorry, 0 to 18 in this
I was
case.
like, dang, that's low.
No, 0 to 18.
0 to 18. Okay.
After that, they're adults. They're full functioning adults after the age of 9.
Yeah, if
No,
they want
just
to
kidding.
drink
It's
a
0
bottle
to
of
18.
wine, they can drink a bottle of wine at 9, okay?
Oh God. Do you remember trying your first sip of wine or alcohol and you were like, ah,
Yeah,
like, yeah,
disgusting.
I can't imagine it's any different. I know. I was like, why do people do this to themselves? And now I'm like, why are people sober? Like, I
I
don't,
know.
people do this by choice.
When I was really, really young, my dad had given me jerky, but it was a shredded jerky. And he pulled out a bag of dip. And I was like, Dad, I think I was like 5 or 6. And I was like, Dad, I want some. And he was like, this is not what you think it is. And I was like, yes, it is. That's what you gave me a while back. I want that. And he gave me a little pinch of dip.
You pop it in your mouth.
I popped it in my mouth and I swallowed it. And he told me that I was
Oh,
throwing up all that night. And I don't remember any of it,
oh,
but
it's terrible.
I learned my
Of course
lesson.
not. You probably dissociated through the whole thing, dude.
I
Like,
was so
it's like
traumatized, I threw it
trauma
out.
response. Yes, yes. Like your frontal lobe was shut down, friend. Like you didn't have any memory consolidation for good reason.
Yes.
Like,
Oh, that's so funny.
that's funny.
So how do you deal with people who are like, whatever, everybody has childhood trauma, like there's nobody special, there's nothing special about that, suck it up, deal with it.
You know, I am surprised I haven't really encountered that.
Oh, that's good.
I I know, like I think even for how taboo trauma still is, and especially remote trauma, and like something like you don't really share, right? Like people feel more comfortable sharing something like, yeah, my parents were divorced, or like, yeah, my mom was an alcoholic, or whatever, but people have been very receptive. And in fact, like I recently presented at in Alamogordo there, and I presented this was my first time presenting for the EMS community, like the pre-hospital community, and they were so receptive. I was blown away, and it was like it's incredible. Like people are thirsty for it, and they had questions, and they shared some really good tips with each other. Like the community is ready. And why are we ready? Because we've encountered it so much. And I think a lot of this was exacerbated by COVID. Like we've all gone through childhood trauma, but that last little bit of COVID that like punched us in the face was like was a wake up call for me. The community has been immensely supportive. And like I haven't had a single person be like, I call bullshit on that. Like, at least not to my face.
Sure.
So I was a little more worried about the EMS community being like, that's just a bunch of bullshit. And just like, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing where like depression is a choice or whatever. But like, I none of that. Like the community was ready, so people have been great about it.
That is
But I'm ready. I'm
fantastic.
ready. I'm ready to roll with the punches. Like if people come at me with like that's a bunch of BS, I'm ready for it.
So what would you do? What do you say? Like, what have you prepped for that conversation?
I like to ask questions of people. So if somebody says, "Well, that's a bunch of BS," I don't think that's true, or whatever, it's like, "Well, tell me about why you feel this isn't the case," and I kind of move on. But to me, it's helpful to ask questions of people, have them give me information so that they internalize the information that they're saying, and their feelings about it, rather than me, an external person coming at them who I don't know them, I don't understand their life. And it just, things are much more meaningful sometimes when they come from your own persona
Sure.
rather than advice from somebody else, like I don't know if you've ever been to therapy, but like I know I've had instances where my therapist will suggest something and I'm kind of like, no, I don't think so. But the
Not
solutions are
today.
much better if they come from me or ever, really. I'm like, how about now? How about something else instead? So the
Yeah.
solutions are much better when they come from yourself. So I feel the same way about information that like it's easier to understand your own biases. It's easier to like you be the one to look at your faults, at your mistakes, at your, like I said, biases, rather than have somebody point them out. So a lot of it would just be patience, understanding, kindness, really, because these folks, you don't know what kind of reality they're living in that they've had to shut down so much to the point that they genuinely don't believe that trauma has any sort of effect on them, or that you can, again, quote, pull yourself up by your bootstraps when it comes to anything mental health related.
Yeah, it's such a big stigma. And people want to pretend that it's not right now, but it is still such a huge stigma. And it's funny that you talk about bullying not being on that questionnaire, but how many adults can take that questionnaire and still pop positive for, a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 in this time frame, in their middle adult lives or in their young adult lives? It's pretty insane.
Right? Yeah. So New Mexico, for the most part, is pretty well distributed when it comes to how many A scores people have. So, like, there's about 20% of the population that has no A scores, about 20% has one or two, about 20% ish has th- uh, 3 to 4, and then four or more is about 25-ish percentage. Like it's like basically like quartered, like divided into fourths or fifths. So it's pretty evenly distributed for the most part. So people in the end have certainly scored at least one, like 3 out of 4 people have scored at least once.
That's pretty interesting stuff. What a great topic. And I think it is a much needed topic for, today's events, especially post COVID. Like you were saying, COVID was a huge slap in the face, I think, for everybody, not just mental health, or sorry, not just healthcare professionals, but literally everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I was trying to prepare myself to come into the podcast to not have COVID take over the entirety of our conversation, because it's like we're all tired of it, but we're still all actively processing the trauma and the PTSD from it. So like it also makes sense why like it would take over most of our conversation, or at the very least rear its ugly butt in the conversation,
Yes.
like I
Yes.
don't know, how many podcasts have you had with people recently that you didn't talk about COVID?
Not very many. Yeah, it's been
Yeah,
like
yeah,
one or two that it hasn't actually
right.
broached the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah.
COVID messed us all up.
Dude, I don't really know if there's a recovery from it either. Like, I mean, you've been in the healthcare world for how long already?
Going on 19 years this year.
Yeah, dude, I mean, nobody knows it better than you do. Like, you've seen
Yeah.
healthcare take a straight up nosedive. Like, it was unrestrained in a speeding vehicle while intoxicated, went through the windshield, face planted on the asphalt, for like slid for 30 feet. Like, you saw healthcare take a nosedive,
Yes.
and how do you recuperate from that? I was fortunate slash unfortunate enough to have been in healthcare long enough to have seen some really cool things and like great care in some ways. And now it's like facilities haven't come down from 100% census since like spring of 2020. Like, how do you effectively take care of patients if there is no place to put them?
Right. 100% census and like 50% staffing, right?
Mm. And that 50% staffing is new people,
Yeah.
right? It's like you have 1 year old nurses who, guess what? We need you as charge. And I'm sorry, you're going to have an assignment as well. And you have no tech on the floor. And your ratio is a 7-to-1. Like it's just that's the entirety of healthcare right now. It doesn't matter where you are, whether you are like, I don't know how it is in the EMS world, but I know like it's not uncommon to be running code zero. I know that our ratios in the entirety of the country are not the 4-to-1 that they should be. It's like 6-to-1, 7-to-1 in some places. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter where you look at. In the ICUs, like you have your paired 1-to-1s or you have your tripled, and like, how do you take care of such immensely sick patients when you have new staff, when you don't have your PCTs to help you out, when your providers are burnt out, where your patients are extremely ill, haven't been able to take care of themselves, when you yourself are burnt out? Like, this is unsustainable.
Right. And I don't think money is going to fix the problem.
I think that COVID has made the festering wounds of healthcare just it's made us septic,
Yes.
really, right? So like all these like cracks that we had where patients were falling through them, now they're crevasses. And who ends up being hurt by it? Your poorest patients, right? Like your marginalized folks. It's the people that don't have the money to feed themselves well, that don't have the understanding that a salad from Wendy's isn't any better than a burger from Wendy's. It's people that they're drinking to cope, and I've seen countless times where parents buried their 20-year-old child because of liver disease, you know,
Oh yeah,
and
that's a high population here in New Mexico.
yeah, absolutely. And to have, again, parents bury their young adult children, it's just, how do you cope with that? How do you see that day by day? We're not programmed to cope with this amount of pain. It's our every day, but this is absolutely the worst day of these people's lives. And
Sure.
how do you cope with that every day?
Right, from the healthcare side or from, the patient's family side.
Absolutely. I mean, when during COVID times, like in the ICUs, um, there's a time where I remember looking around and being like, half of the patients in here are Native American. How did this happen? Are 50% of our patients Native American here in this country? Like in New Mexico, are 50% of our population? Certainly not, right? So there was times where I had one patient here admitted in the hospital in the ICU, and their sibling was in Arizona, and they were both actively dying at the same time. And parents had to choose which sibling to go see because they
Yeah,
only had one vehicle.
if they were
Like,
allowed to get in to see them.
oh, and that's a whole nother can of worms, bro.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no, I, there's a before COVID and there's an after COVID for sure.
Yeah. No, one of the buddies that I went through my fire academy with when I was younger actually passed away from COVID, and he got transferred to the main trauma center in the state where he was from, and his family couldn't even, go say goodbye to him. And that was just, and I don't want to say that we have privileges as healthcare providers because even during COVID, we didn't, you know what I mean? But we do
Right.
normally, where we're able to go in and see somebody where they normally wouldn't be able to see them. But during COVID, nobody was able to go in to do anything because everybody was having to
No.
gown up, mask up, and do all that stuff. I think when they
Yep.
finally
And we
did
didn't
bring
have the
in the
resources.
yeah, I think when they finally did bring in like the video stuff, at least I hope that helped a little bit for people. But that was just a really terrible time. And he was
Yeah,
young. He was in
I
his
distinctly
30s.
remember that. Like, it's just the video, the video stuff is just like, yeah, God, is this helpful? Like, I don't know. Like, you're hoping that it's bringing some closure in, but like having the video of like your loved one with all these tubes in their faces, irrecognizable. It's just like, how do you do that? And like in your case, like how, like it could have been you, it could have been I in that end. Like why your friend out of all
Yeah.
people? And how do you recover from that? Like,
Yeah, it's tough. So you said you were in the ICU during COVID.
yeah, sure was a COVID ICU nurse.
So how did you cope?
I didn't.
At least you're being
I didn't.
honest.
I didn't. I didn't. Like, I just like it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, but is there such a thing as like presently traumatic stress disorder? Like,
Presently,
like
yeah.
we're still
I
we're
feel that
still
way too
suffering
hard.
from the throes of it. I
Yes.
know. I know. It's like, I remember like when we got our first COVID patient, and you know, I remember our first COVID death because it was one of my people very near and dear to my heart had our first COVID death. And I remember having a conversation with my wife and sitting down and be like, babe, like this is going to get really ugly. And I love my job, and I think it's important to for me to keep doing what I'm doing for my community. So are you okay with me dying because of COVID? Do you need me to quit my job? Because I just like this is going to be really ugly. And so we had that very serious conversation where she was like, she respected my wishes of wanting to stay bedside. Um, but I remember I would come in through the backyard, and our backyard door was right next to our washer and dryer. I would get naked right by the washer and dryer. I would head straight to the shower and just like shower in like really hot water and just like hoping to dear God that like I wasn't COVIDy and I wasn't going to hurt my loved ones because of this. And just a few months into COVID, I fell into a very deep depression. I was functional, but barely. I remember, like, at one point, like, I came home from work and I just collapsed on the floor. Like, I walked in through the threshold, threw my backpack down, and like curled into a ball and just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed on the threshold of my door, like curled up into a fetal ball and just was like, I can't do this. How I don't know how to keep going. And I'd been in therapy already by the time, thankfully, but I just actually just got recently discharged from my therapist just a few months ago, but I was with my therapist for 6 years, and I started meds, and the trial and error of meds was awful. It was the SSRIs giving more side effects than benefits. I even had an episode of catatonia. Like in retrospect, when I was titrating my meds up, I went up to um, on the dosage of my meds, and I was zombie, like sitting on the ground, staring at the ground, and was soothed by being dissociated, like staring at the ground. And like, just in retrospect, like I was like, oh, that was like full blown catatonia. Like, um, so I didn't really cope, like the first couple of years of COVID, like I remember being very angry at my family for like hosting a Christmas party. I remember having like, we worked 3 on 4 off. And if I was uh when I was trying to recover, it would take me 2 full days of sleep, full days. My third day, I was up half of the day. And by my fourth day, it was like, well, you basically ready to go back to work, you know? I think one of the things that COVID robbed me of was I suffered from severe anhedonia. I wasn't able to focus on things, whether it was pleasure like reading or whether it was reading a scientific article. Like I used to read like 120 plus books a year, no problem. And it got to the point that I read like five in a year. And I was struggling to focus at work with like my numbers for my pressers. And it was, you know, COVID robbed me of a lot. And I'm still barely clawing my way out of it. Where like I just started my doctorate for nursing practice. And I'm like, I really hope I can do this because I can't focus. What am I going to do? You know, I certainly had moments where I wasn't ever really actively suicidal per se, but I was so deeply depressed and hopeless. The hopelessness was really the worst part of it. Um, the hopelessness and my pain and my numbness were so severe that I was just passively suicidal, where I was just like, if I go, I go. I, it's fine, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's rough, dude. I'm so sorry you went through that. And that you're still going through that currently, right? We're talking about present trauma, right? That's
Yeah,
unfortunate. But I hope that and it sounds like you're utilizing the tools that you need to help you move forward.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm immensely fortunate to have a great support system. You know, lots of friends and family that I can reach out to. You know, I had the privilege and the fortune of being able to have a therapist. I was medicated for at least like the past 3 years. I finally was able to get off of my antidepressants, and you know, I'm fortunate, but I know not everybody was fortunate enough, you know. So I always encourage people like, don't hesitate to reach out. Like there's somebody out there of your friends, of your family that has a similar concept or idea as to what you're going through. And, you know, I think many people don't reach out because they've been let down. And I don't blame them, but this is when I like to recommend people call the Agora Crisis Center, call 988 if you're in the healthcare world, if you're in EMS. Like there is the EMS hotline specifically that is of huge help. You know, I know I had friends who died by suicide during the pandemic or after the peak of the pandemic. You know, and we we need one another, and in the end, there's help and there's hope.
Yep, there is. And I tell everybody every episode, feel free to reach out if you need. Don't sit there and
Absolutely.
suffer alone in silence. Don't there's no point in it, right? There's no point in suffering. So
Absolutely.
reach out and make your issues known
Absolutely.
and let's figure it out.
Yeah. You know, I think having gone to therapy was hands down one of the best things that I did for myself in my life. And I think most of us healthcare workers don't really do much for ourselves oftentimes, you
We
know.
definitely do not.
We certainly pour from empty cups, right? And I think that having that 1 hour a week for myself where I could talk at somebody was immensely healing, you know. So if there's somebody out there who's like kind of vacillating between like, I don't know, maybe I should go to therapy or not, is like, this is your sign. Like, go to therapy. Like, you have nothing to lose, you know. And for many of us, therapy is free. So, you know, it's a beautiful thing to be able to take care of yourself and pour from a cup that doesn't feel empty.
Yes, very, very true. So you had talked about how you got to see a lot of really cool stuff while you have been a nurse. What would you say has been like one of the coolest things?
Um, Coolest things, man. That's a very difficult question. I think that we all love to see the really cool clinical stuff, right? And like I know I've like taken out colons at bedside in the ICU where like
Mm.
the patient is too unstable to go to the OR and you are literally pulling out a colon in at bedside, or where it's moments like you get to see the progression of something like COVID, for example, like when there was times where you would have a patient coming in satting 70% on BiPAP and they're like pissed off talking to you, upset about the fact that you they're in the ICU and they don't know why. They're pissed off and they're like satting 70% with a good plan, speaking of clear full sentences, but it's a 70. It's like but I really don't think I had stories as cool as like from like EMS times, where
Oh,
like
no, no,
you're
no. I want to know what the coolest thing you have seen. And I would also like to preface this with the first thing you talked about, even though you were very professional in the way you said it, you talked about butt stuff. So
I know, right?
you did. You
Here I
started
am
it
being
with butt
judgy about you
stuff.
and the family.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, it's funny. But the clinical stuff is like super, super cool. But I think some of the moments that I'll take with me forever are like the connections that you can make with your patients, right? Like I remember during COVID times where I had a family member who really wanted to come see their loved one. And of course, nobody was coming in. Like healthcare workers were the only people coming into the hospital. And the only people getting masks were the attendings and the bedside nurses. That's it. Like nobody else was getting N95s, And I remember having to get really creative as to like figure out like how can you see your loved one? And then I realized, oh, my patient's room is right next to the garage. So the parking garage used to have these like windows. They're not windows, but like places where you could see the unit, like the building next door. And I was like, you know what? Let's give this a try. How about you come to the third floor of the parking garage, and I need you to face the south windows, and hopefully you can see us from there. And I remember getting my patient out of bed and I walked him over to the door to the window and I was like, do you want to just get some sunshine? And his family was there and the like of course my sweet patient just like broke down and cried and like the loved ones had like signs up of like daddy we love you, get well soon, and like they were able to see each other like after weeks of being in the hospital. Or like there's times where I had a patient that hadn't seen sunshine for 100 days and I enlisted my RT and I was like, hey, can we go out to the patio? Let's get my person out to get some sunshine. And you know, my seeing my sweet patient, my bedbound patient, uh, see the birds outside and feel the cold because it was a little chilly too, and feel the cold outside was like really meaningful. And like it was cool because like his family, he must have told his family about it, and his family recognized me and they was like, the person with the blue hair, is that, are you Gabby, are you the one that took out our family member outside to get some sunshine? I was like, oh, I guess I got around. Yes, that sure was me. Like those are the moments that you're going to carry with yourself forever. Those are like, I love taking care of like really sick patients, but like the stories that I know I never forget are the moments where you get to be that person, that stranger that somebody will never forget about. It's a really beautiful privilege to be able to take care and influence the people the way that we do. It's my favorite part about healthcare.
It is a fantastic part of healthcare. I agree, and those are fantastic examples. They're amazing, and you can see it, but the people listening that can't see, I had a huge cheese on my face, so that's great stuff. Do you have you ever had any mistakes or regrets that you would want to share to prevent people from having the same mistakes?
Oh, other than mistakes like medication errors from like not being watchful or whatever, it's a good question. I never regretted not having gone traveling. Like, that's one thing that I was like, I mean, it is what it is, uh, there's times where I wonder if I'm going to regret not leaving healthcare. Like, is this affecting my health and my well-being? Like, I know I'm absolutely doing what I love and I'm doing what I have a gift for, but am I going to regret not having left healthcare? First of all, what am I going to do? Like, I often ask myself, like, what am I going to do if I'm not in healthcare? Like if I leave bedside or leave healthcare, what do I do? So I don't have something that's like glaringly staring at me right now that I can remember, like, oh yeah, that was a huge regret. I think it's more the worry of, am I going to regret staying in healthcare, or leaving healthcare for that matter?
No, that's a big one too, right? Like a lot of people talk about staying with what and that's one of the things that I think about all the time. I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that I got crusty. I got really crusty for a little while. And like I didn't leave because I don't know what else to do. This is literally, I got into this when I was 18 and knew about it because my dad was a cop. And so that put me in a position where I felt like if I left, I'd have nowhere to go and I'd be starting all over with something brand new. And that was scary. The idea of it
Absolutely.
was scary.
It's the unknown devil, right? Like the
Yes.
known devil is so much easier to cope with, which is a lot of the times where like people are quick to blame for, like, let's put it this example for like if somebody is in an abusive relationship, people are quick to blame us like, why aren't you leaving?
Yes.
It's very much the same way in healthcare, right? It's like the unknown is much scarier than the known devil, no matter how bad that known devil is.
And ER and EMS, I don't want to single them out specifically, but it's the worst cases that is abusive. It is abusive, and we set ourselves up to be abused in that system because we keep picking up
Absolutely.
that over time, and then it's an expectation, and then we deal with all of the abuse from the patients that we deal with too. And it's not every single patient, but it is a huge number.
Absolutely. I mean, EMS workers are, whether it's pre-hospital or in hospital, are subjected to the most amount of abuse compared to any other healthcare, including healthcare workers working at correctional facilities.
Wow.
Yeah, eye-opening, isn't it?
Yeah, it is eye opening. I mean, we're hearing about it now all the time because we have easy access to news, on our phones of people getting killed, where people are
Right.
walking in with guns or knives and shooting and stabbing healthcare professionals, whether it is
Yep.
a domestic violence case or just somebody who's really upset.
And what a way to bring it back around to childhood trauma, right?
Yeah.
Like it's that dysregulation, it's that like shut down frontal lobe, it's that like the physiology of your brain has been completely rewired to the way that like trauma has formed new pathways for your brain to just misfire and not cope.
So are you saying that about the patients that come in and kill or abuse the healthcare professionals, or are you saying that about the healthcare professionals that stay in these violent situations?
Both.
Okay, perfect.
There's challenges in both scenarios, and a lot of it has to do with what we saw and what was normalized for us during our childhood.
So just curious on your opinion, would you include video games into that form of, experiences?
As in, like, do I feel like there's a correlation between violence and video games?
Yes.
I haven't read what the literature has said. From what I've heard, is that I've heard both. There is some correlation and there's not. What do I feel from what I've experienced? I mean, even if it's fiction, you're immersed in it. And even if it's like, I think a lot of it has to do with what kind of resources do you have to understand that this isn't how we deal with problems, to understand that, like, if you have a parent who may not allow you to play violent video games until you're a more developed human being compared to like, is it different for a 16-year-old to play The Last of Us compared to a 5-year-old? Like, I'm sure there's differences there, right? And is this the kind of environment that you see at home? Because if this is what you're seeing at home, that violence, whether it is mismanagement of weapons or, you know, domestic violence in the household, and you're also engaging in video games, that's your reality. But is it different for somebody who is at home nurtured and supported and has the resources and the understanding of these are two very separate things? Like, I'm sure it's different, but does it affect you to play violent video games? I'd like to say so in a way or another.
Yeah. Ah, good workaround. I I appreciate that. It's all good. No, this is a great answer.
I don't know. I don't know. It's like, does it?
I know.
Like, do I want the scientist to tell me like this is what actually happens, or do I want to form my own educated guess on it? Like, probably. I mean, it's like
It's very
wow, like I
circumstantial
certainly
based.
love video games.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like I love video games and like I have been playing Elden Ring and like there's times where I have to like take it by size because it's so cruel and intense. It's unforgiving. But I come back to it. And I keep asking myself, why am I coming back to it? Like is it a great game? Is it like I don't know. Or like there's things like I said, like The Last of Us, it's like this horrific story.
Yes.
And like, do I have uh more mm, healthy ways to cope or to have downtime? Probably, but do I still love playing video games? Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a big gamer
Violent video
myself.
games? Yes. Love it.
I
Yes,
just bought
absolutely.
the Hogwarts Legacy game, and I'm waiting for it to come in for my Switch. I'm so excited.
Oh, I am I am thrilled about the 4 weeks that I'm going to have off from school. I've been already thinking about like what am I going to play during my off time? Like I have these 4 weeks where I have to study for my CEN and like we just moved into a new house in like March. So kind of fixing up some things and projects and but like I'm like salivating thinking about what game I'm going to play and like what is feasible for me to play in 4 weeks because I'm really not going to be able to. I haven't been able to play video games other than
Yeah,
like
no.
once or twice in the entire 10 weeks that I've been in school.
I think it is absolutely hilarious that you are going to be a doctor, right? And you're playing video games like Elden Ring.
Yeah, I know, like violent video games. It's like your
Yes.
cardiologist telling you to like eat well and healthy and take your fish oil, but then they like binge drink and they
Yes.
eat fast food all the time because that's all they have at the hospital or whatever. Like, absolutely.
Yes.
Am I a hypocrite? Yes, Sam, I am a hypocrite. And it feels so good to be a hypocrite.
I just have to call you out on it.
No, it's you're so right though. You're so right.
I mean, I'm just as bad.
Like, am I gonna play Stray, like that cat game on PlayStation 5? Probably. Am I prioritizing The Last of Us and Elden Ring and whatever else? Yes.
That is fantastic. I love that. I love that so much.
I'm really excited for the Hogwarts game though. You'll have to let me know how it goes.
Oh, I'm so excited. It honestly, like, it really was kismet that I was able to get it the other day because I had talked to Bank of America, who I bank with mostly, and they always send out those like surveys. They're like, "Hey, fill this out. You could have a chance to win up to $100 or whatever." And you're like, "Oh, okay, whatever." But I'm still gonna fill it out because I always do that. And I did it, and then I got an email, and they were like, "Hey, yeah, you were selected for the $100." So I was like, fuck yes. And I
Me?
had just, yeah, and I had just texted my wife that morning. I was like, Hogwarts Legacy came out for the Switch, and I didn't know that it was coming out that day. And then here I am getting $100, and I was like, oh, this is going down right now.
This is Jesus telling you you need to buy the game.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, this is
Yes.
happening.
Yes.
It
What
was
is your house? I'm kind of curious. I'm trying to like box you up into a house, but I'm like, I don't quite know.
Yes. It's usually one of two answers.
You're certainly not a Slytherin.
Definitely not.
You are, you're either a Gryffindor or you're a Hufflepuff.
I'm kind of offended, but I'm not that offended because everybody says Hufflepuff. I'm not Hufflepuff.
Are
I'm
you a
Gryffindor.
Gryffindor? Of course. Well, that's the first thing I said. So
It
my
was.
wife is a Hufflepuff, my sweet soul. Have you seen the meme about how like Gryffindor Hufflepuffs are potatoes? I'm
No.
gonna have to send it to you.
Please do.
It's like it has like each four of the houses, and it's like it's Ravenclaw. I'm a Ravenclaw, just in case you couldn't tell by my
Yeah,
nerdiness.
no,
My
not and
spiel
the blue
about the Tour
hair.
de Ace, not it's like no, none of that is obvious. So that's like the meme, it's like the Ravenclaw and it's like the crow and Rowena herself in there, and there's Slytherin and the snake over here on this other side, and there's Gryffindor here on this corner, and it's like Harry Potter in that corner, and then there's Hufflepuff on this little corner over here, and it just has potato.
That sounds fun. So my wife is a Hufflepuff.
Yeah.
She
Well,
loves it.
for our respected loved ones, I'm gonna send you that meme because it's so good. And like literally, if like anybody just Googles like uh Harry Potter potato meme, it will be the first and only thing you'll see on there. Like it's great.
No,
But who
that
doesn't
is
love potatoes? I
for
mean, come
real.
on,
Potatoes are in everything.
right? Like
French fries.
they're the most delicious thing out there. So they're the most delicious food out there. Period.
Yes, I agree. I agree 100% with that. Oh, that's so funny. I'm so excited for that video game. I can't even like I had to order so because I got an Amazon gift card, like I couldn't order it to download it, so I had to wait for it to be shipped. So now I have to wait for
Oh,
like two
poor
weeks.
soul.
I know. It's all
I'm
right.
so excited for you. You'll have to send me some videos because that's
Yes.
super cool. I ended up not getting the game for multiple reasons. But one of them is certainly I don't have time.
Yes, exactly. That was the original reason. I've spent the last 3 months building a EMT basic refresher, which is 40 CE hours, and I've had to like literally build all of the lectures for every subject. And it has been so much work, and I haven't played my Switch in a very long time, in a much longer time
Oof.
than I have in a long time. And I'm like, I can't, I'm getting ready to pick it up when we're done with this.
Oh, I am salivating for you. That is
Yes.
so exciting. Oh, that's amazing. Did you play Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom?
Yes, I'm a huge Zelda fan.
Oh,
So,
I love it too. I love it. Like Breath of the Wild was just like my mind blown. I was like slipping into a depression and like really struggling with finding something meaningful to do on my time off. And then Breath of the Wild and Switch came out, and I was fine for like an entire year because of video games. So really, do they make me more violent? Maybe, but do they make me cope and happy human being? Yes, yes, they certainly have
yes,
saved my life, literally.
right. In a somewhat healthier form, right? As long as you're not binging for
Absolutely.
24 hours, you're all right.
Absolutely. Not binging drinking or not binging playing video games. I don't do the two things together ever. No, no.
Oh,
Only
okay.
one vice at a time, right? Only one.
Well, that's good.
Got to be measured with your vices.
That's right. That is right. So, speaking of vices, what would you say has been so you've been in healthcare for 15 years. What would you say has been one of like one of the worst things that you've seen? And this is something that affects you personally, not like something that you think would affect everybody.
Um, I know one of the worst things that I have encountered has been actually probably two things. The decline of healthcare and the current standards of healthcare right now are just unsustainable, right? Like the amount of challenges that we're facing right now in healthcare, I worry that it may make the system collapse in on itself. Uh, but at the same time, on a personal level, like having seen myself in the amount of burnout that I've gone through has been really heartbreaking for myself, but also for the people that I trampled between my legs because of my burnout and my depression. When I was in nursing school, I was at my all-time low when it comes to like compassion fatigue, and I saw myself lashing out at people and peers in ways that I didn't find acceptable. So thankfully, I was able to take myself out of that environment, and going bedside actually helped with my burnout and my compassion fatigue at the time. It gave me a sense of purpose in a way. It was reinvigorating. But um, I think really those are the two things that I think are the heaviest and the most awful things I have seen has been the inequities in healthcare and the way that our healthcare system prioritizes profit over wellness of human beings. Like, I really do feel like I work for the devil. I work for a system that makes money off of people not getting better and people getting sick. It's difficult. The fact that this is a capitalist situation, right? But also having gone through the compassion fatigue within myself is a place that I really hope I never find myself in again. I think people deserve better from me than having me not treat them with compassion and kindness when they really don't know any better or don't have the resources or don't understand or are simply trying to get help. Speaking to somebody in hurtful ways when they're down is kicking them. So I really hope I never find myself in that place again.
And now that you're in an educator position, how do you teach new people to avoid that? Compassion fatigue is real, and it's really hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it
Mhm.
themselves. And it's sad because in healthcare, right, we're taught about it and we learn about it, but then you don't really understand it until you're like being told, hey, you're being an asshole. But then you have people
Bingo.
who are taking care of their family members because their family members are sick, because they have cancer, because whatever reason. And then they also have compassion fatigue and they don't know how to deal with it or how to cope with it, I guess would be the correct term there. So, what do
Right.
you teach people?
I think that ultimately I can be blue to the face and tell people how to cope with it and how to take care of themselves. But in the end, it's not until you're staring down into the chasm of burnout and it's staring right back at you that you know that you need to address it. So I can tell people you need to make sure you take your breaks. I know you really want to finish this project. I know you really want to finish charting, or I know you really need to do this or whatever. But if you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to chip away at you. And every little moment that you don't take care of yourself chips away at you because the system is already chipping away at you. Moral injury is a very significant thing in healthcare right now. And if you keep piling on ways that you don't take care of yourself and you don't have those boundaries are very important. It will eat you out alive. Like healthcare will chew you up and spit you out alive. And you're not going to see that burnout until it's, again, that chasm is dragging you right into it. But so I tell people to make sure to take care of themselves and have those boundaries, but also I try to remind people that the compassion that they offer others so readily that it's immensely important for them to offer to themselves as well. Because we talk to others in certain ways, but we don't offer ourselves that kindness and that compassion. We, as a society, don't know how to be compassionate to ourselves. And I think healthcare workers are even even more challenged in that respect. Like we struggle with taking care of ourselves and we feel like it's selfish, right? But really, how can you how can you tell somebody to be compassionate towards themselves when you see your orientee beating themselves up because they made their first medication error because they you know took out the OG tube instead of the ET tube
Yeah.
or whatever, like it's like
Yes.
how can you offer that compassion to another human being if you don't offer it to yourself? Like, is it genuine then? Is it fair for us to be compassionate towards others, but not extend that compassion towards ourselves? Are we truly compassionate if we're not offering it to ourselves?
That brings up a really good point. Like that's a head scratcher, you know. I'd like to point out that you did talk about boundaries also, right? Like setting boundaries for yourself away from work. How easy is it for us to have access to our work emails on our phone, you know, or yeah, text messages when they're asking people for overtime, or if they just absolutely need something in that minute, you're off. You are not required to read your emails. You are not required to do
Mhm.
anything that they're not paying you to do in that moment.
Mhm.
And I've seen a huge movement with people in memes, right, which is the best form of communication right now. Uh, in people telling other people, like, take that vacation time, it's going to go away. You're going to lose it. Take that vacation time. And like you were saying, take those breaks while you're on shift. Take that lunch break. You know, take that time to reset, to give yourself a few minutes to do whatever you got to do, and then go back and finish the rest of your shift.
Absolutely. It's if you don't take care of yourself, nobody is going to take care of you. And you know, hopefully you're in a work environment where it isn't toxic and people will genuinely care and reach out and notice that you haven't eaten and notice that you're really struggling after your patient died. And hopefully they reach out to you. But what if you're not? Like I mean, it's cheesy, but if you don't take care of yourself, I am sorry, nobody is going to. Not
Yes.
in the current not in the way that healthcare system is now, right?
Yes, we push so hard for healthcare professionals in whatever form to advocate for your patients. We need to start pushing to advocate for yourselves.
Absolutely. Like, it's why are we not advocating for ourselves? You know, like, what is it that we like? Is it like this, like, martyrdom? Is this like, is it impatience to like grow and be better faster and sooner? Like, I don't understand, you know. But I was taught that lesson early on in the critical care world, that you have to take care of yourself, especially if you're wanting to provide optimal care to people. There is no worse feeling than pouring from an empty cup. It's unsustainable.
Yes, I agree 100%. And Gabby, I appreciate you so much for coming on today. What a great conversation. And I cannot tell you how fucking proud of you that I am.
Thank you.
It has been amazing getting to see you from where you were to where you are now. And I really do think you're going to make waves. And I hope that you're as successful in your national setting that you are going to be in next year as you want to be.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from somebody like you that like I deeply respect. And like, you know, it's I really want to do good for our community, and I hope that others out there take it to heart and see something come to fruition from our conversation today, whether it is please take care of yourself, whether it is, you know, go learn about like childhood trauma and like how that affects your patients, or whether that is go to therapy, you know, reach out. Like, it I really hope that this conversation is as nourishing to others as it was for me. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you again so much for coming out. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Of course, friend. Thank you. Pleasure as always to see you.
Thank you for listening. Before we wrap up, we have a few important announcements to share with you. Firstly, we're excited to announce the launch of our brand new 911 Nonsense Facebook group page. It's a community where everyone can go to connect, share ideas, discuss topics from the show, and get all of the most recent updates about the podcast. We'd love to have you join us and be part of the conversation. Next, we want to ask you to rate and review our podcast on your preferred platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach a wider audience. By rating and reviewing the show, you'll be supporting us in a big way and helping others discover 911 Nonsense. If you enjoy what we do and would like to support the podcast even further, we have a few options available. You can visit samspursuit.com to find the links to our 911 Nonsense merch page and our recently released Noon gear page. Every contribution, no matter the size, goes a long way in helping us continue to better the podcast. We know that not everyone is comfortable being on the podcast, but we still want to hear your stories and experiences. If you have a compelling story and would like to share it to be read by me in a future episode, please reach out to us via email at 911nonsense@gmail.com or through our website's contact section. If you choose to be anonymous, we'll make sure to respect your privacy while sharing your story in a way that resonates with our audience. Thank you again for tuning in. We truly appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more engaging content in the future. See you next week. Hey everyone, if you're looking for an amazing book to read, I have a great suggestion. Ready Left, Ready Right. It's a medical thriller written by one of my good friends and favorite new authors, Dee Finder. Dee Finder believes in supporting first responders and their mental health, so with every purchase of Ready Left, Ready Right, a portion of the proceeds goes directly to the nonprofits, Debriefing the Front Lines, 62 Romeo, and the Overwatch Collective. The book is now available on Amazon. Don't forget to listen to our podcast interview with Dee Finder, Season 2, Episode 14. You'll be able to find the link for his book and our noon interview in the description below.